That's impressive.
Yeah. We sometimes we'll give it like 2 or 3 minutes, and what I'll do for my town halls is I'll start just playing a little bit of music, and come in and say, hey, we're going to start in 5 minutes. Welcome, get yourself settled. But
Keep it there, Mom.
Are we live?
Says it to me.
Yes, it says stream live.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Manny Pelaez. Welcome to a town hall, and welcome to a difficult conversation. It's we know what's happening in the United States. We've all seen it. There's a lot of screaming and yelling out there, but there's very little talking. And so I figured, let's talk. And so I've invited some people that you know and some people that you don't know, and we'll start off in no particular order. Actually, there is an order. It's alphabetical. So one of our friends that we've invited today's town hall on race relations is Bishop Trevor Alexander. Welcome, Bishop.
Thank you, sir. Thank
you. Now, the bishop is retired military. He served in the Army. Thank you for your service, Bishop. He's been out as a senior pastor at True Vine Church for 24 years. His beautiful wife of 32 years is an educator. And you said that she was a principal at one time of a school?
Yes, sir.
Great. He holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Incarnate Word in psychology and religious studies, and along with a master's of arts degree in pastoral ministry from the Oblate School of Theology, and a Doctor of Divinity degree from St. Thomas Christian College and Seminary in Jacksonville, Florida. And he's currently serving at the University of Incarnate Word as the Protestant chaplain and adjunct faculty at the University of the Incarnate Word. Bishop, that's a lot of accomplishments, and we're proud to have you. Thank you for being here. The next friend of ours that we've got is a person by the name of Dr. Carey Latimore. Dr. Carey Latimore is a professor out at Trinity University, and his wife is also an educator. She's a teacher of special ed students for, did you say NISD?
NISD. Hatchet.
NISD. And Dr. Latimore teaches at Trinity, and he holds an MA and a PhD in U.S. history from Emory and a BA from Richmond. And he's a subject matter specialist and expert in African American and Southern history. And one of his focuses is the construction of African American communities from Reconstruction through the Civil Rights era. And so I think we're really lucky to have a subject matter expert with a sort of the long historic view on race relations in America. And I really appreciate you making some time for us on a Saturday, Doctor.
Thank you. It's been my honor. It's an honor.
The other fella, some of you guys may recognize him, Ron Nirenberg, and he's at home right now. Thank you for being here, Ron. He's the mayor of the city's, the seventh largest city, and mayor, the fastest growing city in the United States. And Mayor, you are also, the guy who's been getting a lot of heat, along with city council members. And you've been out front and loud and and leading. And ever since you've taken office, you've made it absolutely clear that civil liberties, compassion, equity, and dignity are the values that lead, your decision and I'm sorry, every decision you make. You were raised in Austin, Texas, and you also attended Trinity University. And like me, because we couldn't get into Incarnate Word, Bishop, so we had to go to Trinity. Okay, folks. So we are waiting for another friend, Kimiya Factory. And when she shows up, we'll introduce her. But why don't we just do this? Mayor, Bishop, first question. And we'll start with the Bishop. Bishop, where were you when you saw the George Floyd video? And what went through your mind? And what did you do immediately afterwards?
Wow. I saw it on social media. I was on Facebook, and I was shocked. I was full of tension, and this tension of my emotions went from rage, anger, pain, and sorrow, because we saw a human being die before our eyes. And I kept hearing, "I can't breathe." And I thought about Eric Gardner saying those same words. So there was a tension inside of me that really resonated with this. And then there was a thing like, here we go again, right? What's gonna happen next? How many more Black people has to die before something happens? So this is internal tension that hit me, that caused me to like, wow, what, how are we going to deal with this issue as a community, as a nation, as a people? And what is my role? What is my role now as a leader in the community? How do I speak wisdom, comfort to people that are looking for guidance? So my emotions was all over the place. And there was a tension, a theological tension that hits me every single time this happens. And that theological tension is, if we believe that we're all created in the image of God, how can another human being treat another human being the way we saw it on social media, on TV? How can that happen? And then the other question is, what part of this man, this policeman's humanity is broken? And how could we, the church, have gotten to this man, help him to frame and to see people as human beings? So yeah, I was all over the place, and I'm still all over the place, but I'm trying to be more guarded now, and my response so is not emotional, but speaking with wisdom that we can provide guidance to our community.
Thank you, Bishop. Dr. Latimore,
Well,
you
I'm
first
gonna
saw
be,
the video. Where were you? What'd you think? What'd you do immediately afterwards?
I'm gonna sound probably a little bit different from Bishop Alexander in this, in that I wasn't surprised. And it seems to me, and maybe um, it just was something that was not unusual for me to see in an awkward way, in an odd way, because I've seen these things happen for such a long period of time. And so I guess to me, it was another example of these things happening. My introduction to all of this happened when I was 14, and that was Rodney King. So
Right.
I was a teenager when I saw this gravelly video of a man being brutalized on, you know, news. And so that was my introduction to these kinds of things. And so really for 30 years, I've seen kind of a cacophony of these kinds of events happening that sadly, it doesn't surprise me when it does happen. So I haven't watched the video. I don't want to watch the video because to me, that's another human being dead in that kind of way. I'm not criticizing people that do. I just am not in a place of where I can sit down and watch that video with the emotions that I have of a human being lost. And I share your theological concerns too, Bishop. It's to me an ethical question of the meaning of life for all life. But in the case of George Floyd, his life that was taken. And so it's hard for me to watch that. So I wasn't surprised. My emotions are all over the place. But it's kind of like that's how the last 30 years have been, in a sense, emotions
Yeah.
all over the place.
Mayor, before I ask you the question, I'll tell you that I'll make a confession. I have yet to see the video from beginning to end. I can't watch it all. I have to watch it in little pieces. I've seen the entire video, but I can't sit through the entire thing. It's too difficult for me. Where were you when you first saw it? What'd you think? And how many times have you seen it?
Well, I would say that my answer to the question may be unfortunately too typical. It was, I believe it was the day after Memorial Day. And you might remember that that was the day that we were delivering our final report of the city council and the county commissioner court of all the working groups from COVID-19. And so during the day, for the last 2 months, we've had the news on CNN or the local Spectrum, whatever. So we see the numbers and we see the updates from all the different cities and so forth. And it was around the lunch hour, right before we were going into the meeting, and I saw this story flash on the screen, and I saw the video where it was facing Derek Chauvin, sort of looking up at one of the bystanders. And I remember seeing, George Floyd's name on there, thinking that we're watching a clip from about 5 years ago, that this was in the past. that this had happened before. And so when I went into the meeting, I kept thinking about this, and I looked online to read the story, and that's when it dawned on me that we were watching actually news again. So my feeling is, so to answer your question, how many times I've seen the video, I've seen the video once. I didn't see the video in its entirety until a couple of days ago. But, you know, I guess my feelings were similar to what people out there are probably feeling, which is that I thought we made progress from the last time this happened, but here we are again, you know, just in our city, across the country, battling with these same issues and the same demons that we thought we'd vanquished the last time we got together to talk. And that's where I am today, which is that a lot of people want to talk about it, but the people who are experiencing this are done talking, and that's why they're gathering. And that to me is I hope you all read Carey's article this morning, Carey Clack's article this morning. That is a glimpse to where this is going to end. We either get over, we either make progress on this issue, or we won't stop gathering anymore. I think people have reached that point, and you know, a lot of mixed emotions, as you can tell. Similar to
Yeah, I hear you, Ron. I hear you. Now, one of the things that I'll you know, highlight is that there's 4 guys on this call with white hair, and the one there's no youth represented here, and that's why I'm very happy to introduce you all to Kimiya Factory. Kimiya, welcome. You're on mute, Kimiya, but let me introduce you to our friend. She's 21 years old. She's a graduate of UTSA with a BA in political science. She's the leader and co-founder of a movement called Change the Rape Culture. And she's dedicated herself to you know, fighting for challenges to Title IX policies regarding structural violence and sexual misconduct at large institutions around her community. But also, Kimiya, you're kind of a celebrity for new reasons, and that is you were one of the leaders and founders of the Justice for Floyd marches here in San Antonio that we've been seeing play out over the past couple of weeks. And so thank you for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mia, you know, here's your chance to answer the question everybody else was answering. When did you see the George Floyd video? How'd you feel when you saw it? What'd you do immediately afterwards?
So I saw the George Floyd video, I want to say the day after it happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, growing up as a Black woman in America, I'm no stranger to seeing Black people publicly executed on social media, on the media. I remember the Baltimore riots when I was a senior in high school. I remember Trayvon Martin. I just remember all of these instances. So it was not only triggering, but it was just another life. It was just like, this is going to keep happening. But this one was a bit more haunting, seeing the saliva come out of George's mouth, hearing him beg for his life, seeing this cop just relentlessly with his knee on his neck. It was disgusting. And it haunted me. I still have nightmares. I actually have a really great support group of friends who have been sleeping with me, who would comfort me in the middle of the night from nightmares that I have. And so just words can't describe what it's like to actually be a Black body and know that that is a possibility for me, for my life, for my brother's life, for my family's life. It's so haunting, and it's so triggering, and it's just a sad reality.
Well, let's start with you, Kimiya, then. What is the role of government in solving this?
I feel like I might have had an answer to that before all of this occurred, especially studying political science and studying law. But I think we have to start from the bottom. We have to take the whole thing down again, and restructure it. We have a constitution that is constantly ratified and changed, but where do we see those implications in, the court of public opinion or in society? I will say though that the upcoming elections are approaching very soon. And I encourage everybody to get out there and vote, because we have to make sure that our government reflects our values. Right now, in the current administration that we're in, we're not necessarily seeing what I feel like America truly should represent. And that is, what do they call it? A melting pot of cultures and values. And this is a place where people, migrate to have opportunities. So I want to see the government be more open and be more reflective of actual policy, working on Democratic campaigns. I see discrepancies. I see rainbow capitalism. I see tokenism. And even coming on, town halls like this and doing certain news interviews, I have to remind myself that to a certain extent, I am being tokenized, right? And that's a term that I like to use, is trauma porn, putting these Black kids on TV, putting these kids in these Mexican children in detention centers, and the media, just the cameras in their face, eating up their rage. All of that, has to do with government and the way that our systems work. So vote. We need to change the seats. We need to make sure that we go from one color to the other. We need to make sure that Texas is more progressive in our values. And we need to make sure that Black people especially have a seat at these tables, not just Obama, and not just, Kamala Harris or whoever. We need to make sure that there is more of a majority of representation.
Ron, you just heard a 21-year-old woman tell you that the government's not doing its job, and react to that. What do you think about that criticism?
I think it's fair criticism. I mean, if look, there's always going to be mistakes made, because government is a collection of people, but government shouldn't turn its back on the systemic injustices and inequities that are built within it, when it's been talked about over and over and over and over again that we can do something about it. So the tricky part is that I don't think anybody has all of the answers, but I think when we get together, we have some of the answers. And the challenge is the way politics and power structures work, is that those with the resources make the rules. And we have to change that. And to Kimiya's point, part of that is voting, making sure that we have people who are going to institute changes that are responsive to that, and that don't have their strings being pulled by those who have more. Part of it is changing some of the laws that we know are recent and unjust. I mean, that one of the things that I think we're not talking about right now enough is the makeup of the Supreme Court. Decisions like Citizens United that reinforce the power structures that exist. And here in Texas, the assault on voting rights, as well as the basically institutionalized gerrymandering that's occurred over the years, it's very difficult to get a reflective government of the people. All that being said, people have to be held accountable, and that's kind of where we are now. There's a myriad of changes that need to occur, and we're going to inventory them, and we're going to talk about them, and we're going to try our best to institute them. But unless we're willing to hold people accountable to that, nothing's going to change. And I think that's what that's one of the things I'm sensing from people who are demonstrating right now, is that they're frustrated because no one has taken accountability for this issue over the years. No one has said, we are responsible for the changes that need to be made. Chapter 143 is going to be talked about a lot with regard to police discipline in the state of Texas, and certainly here in San Antonio. It's one of the reasons why we have 67% of fired cops brought back on the force. But our answer to that can't simply be, let's point to the state, say they need to fix it. We've got to take that upon ourselves to be a voice of change at the local level, as well as working with our community to make sure that we're pointing in the right direction for reform. There's so much to be done. There's so much to be done, and it's not just about policing. Manny, I'm very proud of the work we've been able to do, and we're not even close to first quarter over the last couple of years, and changing the way we distribute resources in the city on a more equitable basis. But every single system of government has institutionalized the power structures that exist, and people are frustrated by that. And ultimately, they are looking for someone to hold accountable to that, primarily the people they elect to office. And I think that's part of the solution. I was at church yesterday, and the preacher said, the commitment to the solution is the answer to the problem. And I think that's part of what people need right now, is someone to hold accountable, because the frustration is mounting and the solutions are going to take some time to come to fruition. But in the meantime, they need to focus on who to hold accountable and drive the change until they see it.
Thank you for that. And that's, that's a lot to unpack. And so just a little bit of that, unpacking it, I think you and I have both agreed that, one of the roles of government is to make sure there's fewer cadavers on our watch at the end of the day from, preventable and foreseeable deaths like murders. Dr. Latimore, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, senators in DC tried to get a vote, and they almost did, but by one vote it died, making lynching illegal. They failed. They couldn't do it. Senator Rand Paul stood in the way, and for some reasons he said, "Look, I don't like some of these details in here." What does that look like to you? Do you see you see why that happened, or help us understand the role of government when government can't even make lynching illegal?
I think one of the interesting things about the desire for anti-lynching laws, that this goes back well over 100 years. You look at Ida B. Wells and other people who were pushing for that, and it's never gone through. And so that doesn't surprise me either. Because to me, I think we've had a series of laws. I mean, you have the 1875 Civil Rights Act, which bans discrimination in public accommodations, and that's not listened to. Then you have the 64-65 Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. So you have a series of laws and amendments that have been tried to make things more equitable. But the one thing that amendments and laws and constitutional amendments cannot do is change a person's heart. And I think that now we're finding out that you can have all the laws on the books. It still doesn't mean that people feel equal to the person they're next to, or want to eat with the person next to them, and that they'll still find ways of trying to separate oneself from another person. And so government has its role, but if individuals and communities find a way to have more empathy for one another, and that's another thing. Studies now are showing that Americans have less empathy for another than they've ever had. Now, that's a sad thing to think that in a period where you had lynching running all over the map, that we have less empathy for each other now than then. Now, I'm not going to get into the reasons for that, but to think about that, if you don't have empathy, you can sit on a person's neck and choke them, or you can be okay with them being placed in a neighborhood that they can't get out of, or you're okay with the fact that African Americans you know, the unemployment rate for African Americans has basically been unchanged really compared to whites over the last 50 years. You can sit in your little cell and not be concerned about those things. So I think laws are important, and the mayor and you as councilman, y'all are working on those kinds of things. But until people see differently, until George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, until they're like your sister and not just that Black person, that's the problem. And I think that that's what's changed a little bit, is that for the first time, I think some people are saying George Floyd could be somebody that I work with. I don't think anybody said that about Rodney King or Amadou Diallo.
Right.
I think Black people were saying that, but I think until a larger segment of people are saying that this could be me, this could be people that I know, people that I care about, people that I have empathy for. I think that's the problem that we have, is a lack of empathy, and finding a way to fill that gap, I think, is really, and maybe that's my religious background, that's the more area that I want to find some way of having more traction there, because a law is a law. People decide whether they want to follow it or not, and then they probably aren't going to be prosecuted for it if they don't follow it. So,
yeah. So Bishop, you know, you heard Kimiya, and you know, a 21-year-old, very smart activist, very impressive. You know, basically say that our institutions are failing us, right? And and that our institutions are sick and broken, and they've been broken for a long, long time, and that nothing's really changed. You hear the urgency in her message. But you've been around a long, long time, and you know, this seems to have played out, you know, in your lifetime a few times, right? And so, what role does government play today versus, you know, in yesteryears, when there is a realization that government just isn't doing it?
Well, let me say this. Everything that has been said is so true, and we need to re-examine. But I want to come at this question a little bit different. So on social media, we saw a 75-year-old man being pushed down his head, and police officers walked by him, right? And when these police officers were suspended, a group of police officers resigned in support of these folks. If you and I push down a 75-year-old man, we're going to be arrested and charged with some form of assault. So the people who are supposed to uphold the law, break the law, and there's no repercussion, or you stand in solidarity with wrong. So back to Dr. Latimore's point, where is the empathy? So I like to say this, I'm going to take a little bit different approach. I think, yes, the government has a hand in solving problems because they make policy. But I want to go back to the institution that I belong to. It's called a church. And the church has, over the years, systematically support systems that are broken, and we say nothing. We are silent. Slavery, silent. I am trying to reach my white evangelical friends to hear them come out and speak out against this issue. We hear the Black preachers, and the mayor was on yesterday on a panel discussion with my senior bishop, Bishop Copeland. He was on there. Y'all did a fantastic job, beautiful job. But I want the institution called the church to come out and work along with city government. You want a change in the hearts of the people? So some of these police officers go to church. I want to hear the preachers speak to this message. I spoke to my congregation on Sunday about this. And I know some other white congregation, but it wasn't fair across the board. Some had chosen to be silent. So if we're going to change some things in our system, the church needs to change. We need to own the original sin of slavery. We never dealt with it as a church. We sanctioned it. We came alongside of it. Some bishops and church leaders owned slaves. And so we had a hand. I'm using we because I'm a part of the church, right? So we had a hand in sanctioning and building this institution of racism, and we don't hold people accountable. I'm not going to call names, but some of these prominent white preachers need to come out and say something and support ours. if our elected officials are working, let's come alongside and work with them. If they're not doing right, come out and talk, have a meeting. Let's talk, hold them accountable. It's one thing to vote. Let's also hold them accountable for saying what they said they're going to do.
Kimiya, there's you've heard those answers, and I'm seeing comments flying through on Facebook, dissatisfied that those are the answers that they hear every time something like this happens. And so here's a question that I've been asked: why are you guys marching, right? And a lot of people say, if it's just about George Floyd, I get it. But Kimiya, this isn't just about George Floyd, right? I mean, you've got a huge rainbow of people out there marching, all of them screaming different things and, screaming the same thing. So unconfuse a lot of us. What's the point? What are you hoping to accomplish with this?
I'm hoping that we can sway away from these institutions and these systems with these fixed rules, including, religion. It has comforted the Black community. That was a way to organize, during the civil rights movement in the 60s. But we also have to realize that we're in a very progressive era where there are queer folk, where there are non-binary folk, where there are trans folk, where there are folk that people where there are folk that don't necessarily fit into the realm of religion or fit into the realm of a government. Because I often have to ask myself, where do I stand as a Black woman in America? This institution, this system, this Constitution was not written for me and mine. I was once considered so much of a fraction of a human being, and it was not too long ago. And I also will say that, offering some criticism here to Mr. Pelaez, because I have listened to my peers over the past couple of days following, them telling you how they feel about how you received their feelings in a town hall. And they said, after today, UTSA students who live in District 8, to understand the councilman who represents us, many, they feel like you don't necessarily care about Black lives. They feel like you brush them off when they talk to you about their concerns. They feel like you are very dismissive of their concerns. And so it starts there. If we cannot listen to our youth who take the time to come to these city council meetings, who take the time to put their life on the line. Okay, by the way, as organizers, we're on the ground. Our boots are on the ground. We are not protected. We are always threatened by white supremacists. So it's really not just holding these city councils and holding these spaces for people to talk. It's actually listening. It's making sure the people on city council aren't smirking or scoffing or acting like, these demands that are absolutely justified are heard. And so, yes, it's not just about George Floyd. It's about Breonna Taylor. It's about Charles Roundtree. That's a San Antonio local case. It's about Marquise Jones. It's about Trayvon Martin. It's about a lot of people whose lives are lost. The list goes on and on and on. And so marching is a step. Marching is liberating. But for the media and for the people to turn a peaceful demonstration and try to paint it into a riot, the way the media tries to work me into little wormholes of did you have anything to do with the riots? As if rage is not justified. Black rage is beautiful and Black rage is powerful. And I will say that until the day I die, because these people have a reason to be angry. Now, is destroying local community and destroying Black-owned businesses and vandalism, is that okay? Absolutely not. But we are not going to paint Black people and the people as savages for being upset that their First Amendment right to freedom of speech, press, and assembly being violated, okay, is wrong. I think that's the step. We need to really get out of our comfort zone, and we need to have more of these conversations. And we need to not just allow Black activists like myself to come on calls like this when George Floyd can't breathe. We need to keep this going. We need to keep the momentum going and keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Kimiya. That's an excellent answer. And, Mayor, you just heard that, I got some comments on social media that, I came across as dismissive during the city council meeting. And we made some comments. And then as soon as I finished my comments, the room erupted. right, and in anger. And when Councilwoman Haverda made some comments, the room erupted, and you had to, bring some order back to the room so that people can continue having this conversation. I've looked at your Facebook page too, Mayor, and there's one or two people out there that are kind of upset at you. And by one or two, I mean hundreds of folks. I mean, we've been getting emails and calls and texts throughout the week. Mayor, how do you, synthesize all of those criticisms of government and, our intentions and our reactions, and then turn that into something positive?
Well, I think it's first to listen and internalize what Kimiya's saying. People are angry, people are frustrated. There's a lot of rage out there.
Yeah.
And if we dismiss that and say, that's not the way you're supposed to behave, this is the right way to do it, you're doing the wrong way, you're missing the point entirely. You mentioned to Bishop that, you've seen these things before. Well, Kimiya's seen these things before.
Yeah.
People are angry because they've tried following the rules, and it results in George Floyd. So I think the first thing is to, and it's difficult. I'm not immune to it either. It's difficult to sit there and get yelled at for something you think you might not have done. But this is where the frustration is. We're elected to office to have that responsibility upon us, to be accountable for it. And I think that's where my headspace was on Thursday, was that the first step to moving the conversation forward is to first acknowledge that, yes, they are justified in being angry at you, because you represent the institutions that have for so long oppressed and led to the injustices. Now, that's the easy part. That's the easy part. Where do we go from there? That's going to be much harder, but I think it is continually and very, with a clear goal in mind of achieving the progress that people are marching for. It is to continue that conversation, and those subsequent conversations. Hopefully, they're not just conversations, but those subsequent meetings of minds are going to continue to be hard and difficult, and people are going to write angry things about you, and they're going to yell at you. But reminding yourself that they are justified. They're justified. And if I had one request for the folks out there organizing on Thursday, in saying that, you could tell I was getting emotional too. It is that, and I heard this, and Kimiya, I don't know if you meant this, but you said that it's not, certainly we don't want to destroy property. We don't want to harm people that are just kind of out there. They want to go home and feel like somebody else is going to take care of it. That's good. That's a good step. And so where does that frustration go? Where does that rage go? As the mayor of the city, I'm asking for that rage to be pointed at me, because that's what I asked for. And I have control of what we do next. And that allows us to focus what our goal is and what we're trying to accomplish together. And if we don't get it done, then that frustration and that anger can be continued to be directed at me until it's addressed.
Yeah, and that, Mayor, that's fair. One of the things that I said yesterday and to a crowd was, we own this. And if you got to beat somebody up, beat up your elected officials. We volunteered for this job, and we asked the public to put us here to have very difficult conversations. And that fury and that sense of urgency needs to be brought to our doorsteps, as opposed to the doorsteps of small business owners who are also just trying to eke by, especially after 3 months of having their businesses closed. And so Dr. Latimore, about that, right? We've got a lot of protesters. You heard Kimiya say, this is the point of protesting. This is why we do it. And certainly there's an expectation that government and through its police keep protesters safe. But then we've got people out there who are frustrating that cause and those efforts by going out and destroying. And so, in your studies, what comes of protests like this when you do see, property destruction like that? And, where does it take the conversation? And, is the reaction from the public who you were trying to convince to do something different? What usually results from this? And take that wherever you want to, because that's a lot to unpack.
Let me start by saying that I think in our country, in which we are sometimes addicted to quick sound bites and things that the news so quickly, the one thing that seemed to take a little while before we got out there was that there's a difference in a protest and a riot. And I mean, I'm sure that everybody on here recognizes it, but on the Facebook, the blog sphere is like, oh, everybody was rioting and this and that. No, it was a peaceful protest. Almost all of these have been extraordinarily peaceful. And yet there are people who believe that anytime certain people, particularly Black people, are protesting, that it almost turns into, in their opinion, a riot. And unfortunately, the historical underpinnings of that go back a long way that really take us around the Civil War era, in which there was this belief that if Black people had freedom, that they would protest and riot and this and that. And that was nothing but a racialized view of the African American community that if you ever watch the movie Birth of a Nation, you see that is a complete lie. It's a horrible movie. And I'm saying the 1915 Birth of a Nation. It's horrible. And yet there were people on that who were almost posting on Facebook and Instagram and others, almost making similar connections. And so I want us to extrapolate a peaceful protest with a riot. And also I want people to recognize that this is a different type of protest because it's such a cross section of America. When I was looking at people who are marching and protesting, it looked like America in ways that other protests, if you think about the civil rights era, it did not look like America. It looked like Black folk alone. If we think about abolitionism, almost 90% of abolitionists were Black people. We pay more attention to the white abolitionists, but they were mostly Black people. So I think that that's a conversation that we need to have and to recognize that this is a different kind of cross section. At the same time, where does it get us? I think we are having conversations about what does it mean for Black people to protest? And why do we see that as different than when, why do we see protests different when it's Black people that's doing it? Why was that different than the people who were protesting saying that they should have the right to not wear a mask? Why did people react differently to that than Black people legitimately, I would argue, arguing for their rights, their civil rights that have been due them for centuries in a sense? And so it's just kind of thinking about that, but then also taking it to what is if you want to say, the non-peaceful demonstrations. Why are some people more concerned about that than when a sports team wins a championship? How many times have we not seen people go into their own city and destroy businesses and loot? And yet there were people who are more concerned about this than those other incidents. And I dare to wonder why that is. Is it the fear of who the people were who were there? And so, you think about the Boston Tea Party. They looted a whole bunch of tea.
And they're heroes.
So I'm not justifying looting. Do not get me wrong. I do not support violence. It is against me. But it is interesting in our country how racial ideologies define our heroes and our villains. And we need to bring more equity in the ways that we look at heroes and villains. Is this a different kind of, is a protest almost for some people like a riot if it's about Black issues? So we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at it, because I dare to feel that for some people, they're still thinking in 1915 Birth of a Nation ideology. And this is 2020. And so,
so Bishop, if you look at, I don't know, Bishop, if you can see all of us on the screen, but I'm seeing Kimiya, and her body language right now is saying absolutely, right? And Kimiya, what I read from you, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is, when white people with guns march, thousands of them march around, capitals around the United States, nobody comes out and says, thugs with guns, let's send out the cops with riot gear, right? But when Black people come out and gather in large groups, you've got all the cops in riot gear ready, right? Bishop, how does that feel to your congregation?
There's a quote that has been thrown around on Facebook and other social media using Dr. King. Dr. King says that rioting is the voice of the language of the unheard. But the second part of that quote is, what is it that America has failed to hear? Okay. So when you see people rioting, I'm with Dr. Latimore and everybody on here, we are not excusing rioting and looting. But Ms. Factory said, it's a passion, it's a rage, right? The question we have to ask ourselves, where is this? Why is this groups of people feeling this rage, and how can we help? What do we need to hear, right? So when me as a pastor, as a bishop, get ready to prepare a message, I understand that when I walk out there, whatever I have to say, I first have to address the elephant in the room, because that's somebody's brother, that's somebody's auntie, that's somebody's cousin. They're our community. Right. And to walk away and feel like that, it will calm down, it will go away. It's an injustice to me, and definitely an injustice to the congregation. So I have to address those things as a leader in the community, as the mayor said, and you have just said, as elected officials, you all take the blame, you all take the weight. I also have to take some of that weight, because I have to take the weight of that community and somehow translate that and come before you all to translate what they're feeling so you can hear it. So the rage is real. And the reason why this rage, because for years, and Dr. Latimore has studied this longer than I have, back in, people have not listened to us. We have been crying for justice. Matter of fact, in the Black community, we say it's just us, not just us, because we don't feel that we have a voice. And let's move on forward. And oftentimes, if a police officer is charged with a crime of whatever that crime is, third-degree murder, whatever, and it goes to the court, 9 times out of 10, there is no action from the court system, because we have been ingrained to believe that the police officers are there to protect us. It protects some, but not us, right? So we have to change the culture, and we need people to listen to the cries. Anger, rage is a cry, and we need to learn how to listen to that cry. Part of the problem, I would say, and I don't want to take all the time, part of the problem is we don't know how to understand the cry, because we don't understand our own cries. So when I hear somebody else crying out, because I haven't dealt with my own cries, I dismiss it. So maybe we need to come to the table. I need to hear your cries, I hear my cries, and come to the table, let's understand it. But if I can't understand your story, understand your journey, your cries get dismissive, because I don't understand. And when we have armed people protesting, and the leader of the United States of America congratulates them and sends them attaboys, and then you have people with no weapons, they're thugs, you are dehumanizing a group of people, as we have seen in the past. And you ask the question, why is there a rage? That's part of the rage.
So Kimiya, here we are, 3 guys putting words in your mouth, and I don't want to do any more of that. React to the 3 men that you just heard, or the 4 of us.
I will say, Dr. Latimore, Bishop, I agree. I agree with also the mayor. And I want to thank the mayor for this statement about, taking on the rage, directing all of the rage at him. And while that is admirable, you are not the martyr. You were elected into your seat by the people. So that means, Mr. Pelaez, it's your responsibility as well to help make that change. It does not all fall on Ron. It falls on all of us collectively. And so I absolutely agree. But I will say, when it comes to rage, I saw a Facebook comment and someone said something like, you're acting like dogs and breaking windows, these windows in our city. And I'm like, what about broken Black bodies? Does that not carry the same weight? So the same way that we equate, just like Mr. Latimore was saying, Black people with being thugs, or like Donald Trump called Mexicans rapists. We have to really break these stereotypes, and we have to really challenge ourselves with those. And also, one thing I don't feel like we talk about in America is domestic terrorism. You know, a lot of the school shootings were done by white folk, and 9 times out of 10, they are alive to see the next day. And so I have a very, very, intense question about if a Black person were to shoot up a school, or if a Black person were to exhibit their right to carry. Philando Castile was murdered in cold blood after letting the officer know that he did have a license to carry, and even reaching to give, the officer proof of that. And so we have to really be critical of these conversations and where we place the accountability of the law, because I know several attorneys, Black attorneys in Bexar County, that have still been racially profiled by the police here in the city. So I think we have to keep all of these things in mind when we talk about protests and we talk about rioting. And I certainly completely agree with everybody, but I feel like as a Black woman who studies Black feminine rage, who reads Angela Davis, who reads Roxane Gay, I agree with Bishop. We need to really look at these intersectionality. That's basically saying, yo, I have this oppression. Your oppression may not be the same exact oppression as mine, but let's talk about it. Let's address that and let's figure it out. And I'm a very, very strong believer in intersectionality. It's what allows me to be a queer, Indigenous Black woman. And so I think we need to let all of these types of identities in when we discuss Black lives, because Black lives are not just Black men. They are Black women, they are Black trans women, they are Black trans men. There is a plethora and an African diaspora to address when we speak about Black lives.
Yeah, Mayor, you just heard Kimiya say, I understand the frustration with, people being angry about, destroyed property. Sort of along the lines of what I said yesterday in front of a large crowd, which is if you're the kind of person who's more upset over broken windows than a Black man getting murdered on television, you're part of the problem. But Mayor, the people who, are part of the problem, they live here in San Antonio too, right? And
Sure.
we've got a lot of San Antonians out there who are more upset about broken windows
Well,
than they are about Black bodies, and I think that's wrong. How do you handle that as a mayor?
well, I think we're all part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because part of the challenge and the paradox is that the story on Sunday morning from the protesting was not about what the protesting was about. It was about the broken windows. And so, I think we all have to be cognizant of that, is that all these institutions that we built up reinforce the same sort of institutional power structures. And I think in knowing that, and I'm not, again, the responsibility to change government and laws, it falls on to those who we elect to those positions. That's what I'm saying. In that regard, we have to focus the message. We can't rely on folks outside to carry it all day long. We need to use that and channel that as public support, but we've got to follow through on our end to change it. And it's going to be difficult. Some of us aren't going to survive in terms of, the electoral part of this, but we all have a role to play, and then we hand it off to the next person. But in terms of, there are a lot of people. This is a very segregated community when it comes to political ideology. It has a lot to do with, the way the city has been built. But I think it's our responsibility also to go out there and create the intersectionality where people don't even know it exists. There are many people in District 10, the most conservative district of our city, that are living barely making ends meet. And, they look like North Side, typical, the demographic is the same, but they're experiencing some of the same challenges of inequity that people on the South Side or the East Side or the West Side are as well. And these are the results of institutional inequities and injustices that have been built for the last 70 years. Creating that kind of intersectionality with all types of people in our community is critically important. And that's how, in my mind, you create a mass political movement.
Well, Mayor, part of something that you and I tried to do recently was to call attention to the fact that, even during this COVID-19 crisis, there were, complaints from our Asian community, right, that they were being attacked and even assaulted in many instances because people thought that Asians, help, transmit COVID-19. And you and I were besieged with criticism and even accused of, what was it, trying to make the words Chinese virus illegal, which we didn't try to do. But, just touching the topic racism, is a dangerous political, thing. And, how do you feel that these marches and protests happened almost a week after we did that?
So I want to speak to something Dr. Latimore said, and something I think we've all been talking about, which is some demonstrations and riots are sort of dismissed as, you guys are you're just fooling around. You had a championship, you're just blowing off some steam. These are threatening to people. And if you juxtapose that with something else you said, Dr. Latimore, which is that these don't look like the typical marches. These are a cross section of the United States. These are young people, old people, white people, black people, brown people. Everybody's in the streets right now saying the same thing. I don't think it's about who is in the street. I think it's about what they're saying. And it's threatening to the power structures that have been built. And so I appreciate you bringing up that example. It's kind of one of those things that's lost, and really, I'll never figure this out. I was approached by the Anti-Defamation League and members of our Asian community and said, look, we're fearful of the rhetoric out there as a result of, the politicization of COVID and the targeting of Asian businesses in particular. And so, this is something that cities are doing. They're passing resolutions to say, we're not going to tolerate that. That's not what our value system are. And if you witness a hate crime, you need to report it. Didn't say that certain speech was illegal, but people were so threatened by that. Some people were so threatened by that, and it just illustrates where people are on this issue. They're looking for an escape path to get into their comfort zone. People. I used some colorful language on Thursday. A few folks were so fixed on that word and lost the entire message about why we were out there. And the same thing is happening with the demonstrations themselves. There has been some unrest. That's separate and apart from the message. And when that happens, it gives people who are threatened by the message of reform an out. And so that's the delicate, I think, walk that we all have to do as elected officials, as activists, as religious leaders, is that we've got to be cognizant of that and try to close all those exit doors and force people to hear the uncomfortable truths that are happening.
Well, Dr. Latimore, I'm sorry, Ron, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, and I just want to close with this. That's why the police situation is so powerful. People are being forced to take a look at city budgets and how they've been built up over the last 50 years. And our whole and the systemic notion of how do we build a safe community is solely focused on what we do with police. It's left out everything else that we create healthy communities with: libraries, parks, swimming pools, anti-domestic violence programs, child welfare programs, all the different things that build up a quality of life that should equate to a safe, healthy community are now taking a back seat to these departments that have 2/3 of our city budget. And that's an uncomfortable truth.
So Dr. Latimore, uncomfortable truth. You just heard that. And you just heard the expressions of frustration from a mayor that, that the entire picture is not being taken in by angry folks. I mean, right now on Facebook, we're seeing, a debate playing out right as you're speaking, Mayor. The chats are saying San Antonio is racist. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. People are racist, not societies. And so, Dr. Latimore, talk to me a little bit about something called aversive racism. I've got notes here that says, Dr. Latimore knows about aversive racism and its impact on these intersections between, races and how they interact.
In a sense, and let me take another direction to get there.
Yeah.
I think one of the consequences of the post-civil rights era is that we have become much more uncomfortable talking about race in an awkward way. I grew up in a very racially divided county. It was a farmland community. It integrated in the late 60s. There was still a lot of things going on where I grew up. But even in school, people were willing to challenge you on issues of race in ways that now people aren't willing to quite go there. They don't want to have those hard conversations on all sides of the conversation. So when we come back to this discussion of adverse racism or implicit bias, and I want to talk about implicit bias. Racism, I don't believe that most people today believe that Black people are innately inferior. I think we've moved beyond that 1960s period. But do people hold certain prejudices against people who are African American? I think the answer is yes. Are certain attitudes subconsciously or non-subconsciously explored? Yes. Do Black people suffer certain discriminations that go beyond that your name, for example, may lead to a discrimination? So if your name sounds Black, you may be less likely to get a job. Or if you're teaching at a university like I do, course evaluations are extraordinarily biased. I've received a lot of discussions about people think that I'm not professional. I even had one student say that I don't dress professionally, that I should dress more like another professor, or I should speak more like another professor. I think I dress fairly decently. Sometimes I'll wear jeans, but other professors do too. This happens to women, particularly it happens to Black women. And so these are kinds of biases that don't exactly, these aren't people that say, I want to destroy Black people, I want to kill Black people. And these are people who are doing this, they may actually think that they're allies, but in their actions, they're replicating a system that continues to demean or hold Black people down. Sometimes the way that people use the word standards or who's worthy, we still use standardized tests that, have problems of bias. And so I think all of these ways are the way that we end up in this discussion of adverse racism is things that are done that aren't what some people think are racist, and they're not done theoretically by racists per se, but they're part of the more smaller things that add up to big things that still continue to perpetuate a system of injustice and inequity in our nation.
Well, Dr. Latimore, let me ask you this, Bishop. One of the things that I've heard, and I'll tell you who I heard it from. I have a staff member who, and I said to her, let's do this virtual town hall. Let's have a difficult conversation with folks, and let's ask the hard questions that we're getting. And one of the hard questions that I got is the same objection that my team member here made, and she said, "Listen, it's not your lane. This isn't your space to talk about, racism and the Black American. This is for them to talk about. You just stand by, be an ally and be quiet, but you have no credibility in this space because you're not an expert in this area like Dr. Latimore. You're not a pastor for, an African-American church. You're not Kimiya, who's a subject matter expert in being a young Black person in America. Basically what they told LeBron, right? Which is, shut up and dribble, right? Or the Dixie Chicks, right? Shut up and sing. How do you react to that when you hear people say, hey, you don't own this. You shouldn't be talking about that. And you're on mute, Bishop. Perfect.
All right, let me get this. So if we lived in LA, right? And LA is known to have this smog. Everybody breathes the same air. You don't have to be an expert in environmental racism and environmental issues. We all breathe in bad air. Racism is all of us. Yes, some are affected more than others, but it's all of us. part of the problem I think we have here is that we try to put racism in one area, one box. Only black people can talk about it. Only white people can talk about it. Racism belongs to all of us. It is a nation issue, not just a black issue. Yes, we are affected, but it takes all of us coming together to solve it, right? I thank God for the mayor being on here. He is an elected official. He's the mayor of San Antonio, but he's a white guy, right?
No, I'm not.
No, he's not. He's not.
Well, I'm just saying the skin color.
Yeah.
Right? But if we don't take ownership and deal with this as a nation, and this, if we don't leave it to the so-called experts to do it, we'll still be talking about this next year and the year after this. Let me also say this in follow-up with Dr. Latimore. Part of the problem with all this implicit bias and biases is that we all don't play by the same rules, right? It plays out in hiring practices, or when as something as simple as when I go to Walmart and I pay with cash and I get ready to receive my change, the person takes the money, puts it on the counter, but won't give it to me in my hand. That's a problem, right? It all leads up to something bigger. When a friend of mine is a chair of a department in the college, and she calls me because she has a dilemma. She has to hire a faculty for her department, and she says she had 3 top candidates. 2 are black and 1 are white. So I said, who's your top candidate? And she mentioned 1 and 2, which I happen to be black. Then she says, but if I hire the black guy, that means 3 of us in the office. And I said to her, what did it look like before they hired you? Because she was the first one. She said, well, I was the only one. I said, so people before you didn't have a problem hiring people that look like you. But now that you're in a position to hire, you now take on this weight of trying to act like you have to be fair, because it comes back against you if you hire more black people, because you look like you're showing favoritism. We have to level the playing field and look at our hiring practices, and don't look at one person hiring one over the other, because she should not have to carry that burden of hiring because her predecessor didn't carry it, but now she's waiting. And the sad thing is she didn't hire. She shut down.
So Bishop, that transitions us to Kimiya. You know, what you've been hearing is just the questions of one man who is not a black man, right? And who wakes up every morning trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. We've got a whole army of folks on Facebook right now who are frustrated because, well, there's some that are frustrated telling us that you're the only woman on this panel. And others are frustrated that, you know, you're the only young person on this panel. I'm Mayor. She is the only young person. I know you like to think that you're a young person, but you're not anymore. And then Kimiya, some of the folks are saying, look, this is all great. You guys are doing some talking, but you aren't doing any changing, right? So I'm gonna shoot it over to you, Kimiya. What would you like the mayor of San Antonio and the city council members, the chief of police, what would you like policymakers to do at the end of this?
Well, firstly, I would like to acknowledge that it starts with not correcting Black people. Bishop just told you that Ron Nirenberg is white, and but he's white passing, and those things are very important to it. It is fair. Please don't interrupt me. It is fair. It's fair to let Black people talk. It's fair to let Black people, you know, have opinions. And so the same way that Bishop was trying to say that Ron is white, it's not necessarily discounting Ron's, you know, ethnicity or culture. It's just saying that Ron is white passing, as are you compared to me or Bishop or Dr. Latimore. So we have to acknowledge the way that we just call Black people, when in fact, I'm an Afro-Latina, but I don't correct you when you call me a Black woman. So we have to be careful about correcting Black people. We need to allow Black people to identify when they're in situations where there is anti-Blackness, or where they are being identified, you know, despite who they actually are. We also can, you know, like I said, stop interrupting Black people, stop interrupting Black women. We can also just learn and say, actually, yesterday, I feel like I was anti-Black. Today, I don't want to be anti-Black. How can I do that? How can I better support you? And the friends that are around me, that are POC, that are white, they all ask me, hey, how can I use my privilege? whether it's throwing my body in front of you at a protest while you're peacefully protesting if a cop shoots some rubber bullets or some tear gas at you, or do you need a meal? Do you need a coffee? Do you need a ride? So it's not necessarily just being these freedom fighters 24/7, but it's supporting Black people and giving them space to just be, because being a Black person in America comes with a lot of things, and not just in America. Anti-Blackness is a global thing, and it has perpetuated for generations. So simply as the mayor, as a councilman, as somebody running for a seat, being humble and acknowledging that you are white passing compared to Black bodies, and therefore you have that privilege, and figuring out how to use it.
So Mayor, you jumped up and said, I'm not, when the bishop said that you're white. Kimiya's right, you are white passing, and I think you recognize that. But why is that important for you to make sure that people understand that you're not just a white man?
Well, so first of all, I heard Kimiya, what she just said. I've never heard that before, and so I appreciate that. I understand that. Second, I think it's just personal for me. You know, I think I take a lot of pride in mixed heritage, and it gets dismissed a lot. So I jump up and say, well, wait a minute. Got both my parents, immigrant families, you know, so that was my reaction, but I hear exactly what Kimiya said. So
the Philippines,
noted,
right?
and corrected. What's that?
The Philippines, right?
Well, do we have time? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? All of us, you know, we're all not just one color, right?
Well, Carey and I share a Filipino family tree now. But you know, Philippines, Southeast Asia, my father's family was Jewish immigrants from Russia and Poland, first generation on both sides. So at any rate, but the point being, what Kimiya had to say about perception of race is the point, not actual race. And so I appreciate that. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah. So, but Mayor, we've been hearing a lot about, you know, sort of what the problem is, and we haven't heard about what we do going forward. We've been here for an hour and 15 minutes now. And, you know, in the next 15 minutes, I don't think we're going to solve it. And so what, you know, we've decided to do is to hold a second one of these to talk about going forward, right, with a particular emphasis on policing. And so just in the short time you've got left, give me your ideas about, you know, right now off the top of your head, because you've been hearing all the, you know, the demands, right? Defund the police, reform the contract, hire this kind of cop, not that kind of cop, fire cops who, you know, break the rules more often than not. Are there any low-hanging fruit opportunities that we've got right now to start this process of change?
Yeah, I think there are. You know, on Wednesday, we're going to be having a public session to level set our council, as well as it'll be a public session to talk about protocols and procedures of the police department, everything from discipline to use of force, so people can see all the elements of it. And also what different layers of law and authority are involved in it. You know, from a discipline perspective, for instance, some of that's collective bargaining, some of that's state legislation, and so we can all understand where the lines of authority are if we want to create change. From there, I think we already have some clear paths. The things that were unaddressed in the last contract need to be addressed in this one, particularly as it relates to the disclosure of records, in addition to statute of limitations. We also have work to do at the state legislature with regard to Chapter 143 and the carte blanche authorities it gives for an arbitration process. And then locally here, things within our purview. There's a great conversation happening right now and real action taking place on 8 Can't Wait, some policies that we know have a direct positive impact on levels of violence through Campaign Zero. I've been in touch with Sam Zingawe over there, and so is our police department, and on these reforms that we can create. So that we need to understand the rules of the road. I think some of us do. We have to level set with the council, and then we have to go address an agenda of reform at every one of those levels.
Well, Mayor, well, actually, Kimiya, you just heard the mayor sort of throw out some suggestions about what to do next. What does that sound like to you? Did you hear something that makes you think, okay, that's a move in the right direction, or is that lip service, or is he missing the point?
I think until I see actual action, it is lip service. And that's
Okay.
just my trust issues as a Black woman in America with politics. But I do appreciate the conversation. I do appreciate the space. And I will definitely be happy to see this carried out. But I definitely do agree that we do need to be more critical of the police force here in the city, and not just in the city, but all over the country. We need to ask ourselves what law enforcement actually is, what that looks like when it's enforced. And we just really need to have a clear definition of adjudication when it comes to the courts, when it comes to the judges, when it comes to attorneys. It's really a big system that cannot work without the other piece. So I think I have so much respect for Ron Nirenberg. I really appreciate the comments. I appreciate the humility that he has, come into this space with, validating me as a Black woman, in my opinion, on these political issues. And I just want to thank you, Mayor Nirenberg, for validating me.
Mayor, I think that's really important, right? When people feel validated, it's when they drop their guard and start trusting more, right?
Well, and let me acknowledge something. This is all lip service until there is action, and we have to acknowledge that too. And that's I'm not. And don't get me wrong. I don't want to just be a fall guy for this. We have to take responsibility for the action, and we have to acknowledge until there is action, it is only lip service. And the responsibility is how do we, as elected officials, you and me, Manny, all of our colleagues, how do we turn it into more than just words this time? That's what people are looking for.
Well, Dr. Latimore, you're.
And I appreciate you, Kimiya. Thank you.
Dr. Latimore, you're a student of words, and leaders that have come before us, generation after generation after generation, have promised change, and yet here we are. You just heard the mayor of the 7th largest city in the United States sort of propose some ideas. What do those ideas sound like to you? They sound different than other ideas you've heard in the past. If you have any advice for him and me as far as how to put some of these ideas into play?
I think before I get to that, I wanted to quickly say about the mayor. And my grandfather was a very light-skinned Black man. He could have passed for white, and many people thought that he did, but he was always very quick to say, I'm a Black man. And I've always known the mayor to be very quick to mention his multiracial ethnicity. And so I always appreciated that about the mayor, is that even though some people may perceive him one way, he's always been very open about his ancestry. And I appreciate that. The suggestions that the mayor has provided are, I think, very doable. I think, when we look at police contracts and things like that, he recognized that it is a process, and that I do believe that the pendulum has shifted a little bit. I'm not anti-police, and I'll be honest, my father was a magistrate. I grew up around cops my whole life. I saw both sides. And I know that we can get better as a community, and that police should need to get better, and we should hold them up to a very high standard, in the same kind of a standard that I get held up to as a professor, or the mayor gets held up to as a mayor, or the bishop gets held up to as a bishop. I would hope that all people in positions of power are held according to the position that they're in, and that they're held accountable for it, because it's when people are not held accountable in positions, then you have abuses that come in the church, in other places. These are all places for abuses. I think, looking at the contract, looking at, how does the community have a relationship with how the prosecution of cops and things like that, all those things I think are legitimate and areas that I think that we should look at. And I think that there are areas that even police unions should be wanting to happen. They should want accountability. Because I would want accountability, and yet I recognize policing is it's not an easy job. I understand that there are difficulties in that, but we also understand that there should be accountability, strong accountability as well. And I think that that's what we all as a community should want, and I think that that's what the mayor is proposing. And I know that the mayor is a man of action. And, you know, I believe that he's got the bandwidth to at least try to make this work.
So, you know, when you said the words, you know, policing is a hard job, and I'm not anti-police, I was watching Bishop Trevor, and he was nodding yes in his body language. Bishop, you seem to agree with that sentiment. And so my question is it a binary choice to say Black Lives Matters equals anti-police, or can you be, you know, hopeful for more good police officers and still stand with Kimiya? And by the way, I'll stop here. Kimiya, I think I've been mispronouncing your name all along, and please forgive me. I'm going to try better. People mispronounce my last name all the time, and I struggle with that.
Yeah, no, you're pronouncing it right. It's Kimiya.
Okay, thanks. Bishop?
I thank you for the question. And again, let me say before I get to the question, I also want to thank the mayor for his leadership. And I said this weeks ago when we were on another Zoom, that our church prays faithfully for all of our city elected officials, because we have to uphold them in prayer as well as support them where they need support. But I think to the question that you asked me, look, policing is a hard job, and yes, they have to make some tough choices. I have some friends that are policemen. I have people in my family who are law enforcement officers. When I go to UIW, I've been there 21 years, right? When I walk on the campus of UIW, I know almost every police officer there, right? I'm friends with many of them. I have their cell phone numbers. I feel safe because I know them, they know me. When I get in my car, that campus, until I arrive home in my house, there is a moment of all of my senses are going off. I was driving the other day and a police officer drove by me, right? I looked in my mirror to see if he's gonna turn around, right? Now, it's different when I'm in civilian clothes than when I have my collar on. When I have my collar on, it's a different interaction. But when I'm in civilian clothes, it's a whole different interaction. My personal interaction with policemen has not always been pleasant, right? But I would like to see every citizen have a sense of safety when they interact with our police officers. So one of the things, Mayor, I would suggest, and I don't know how to do this, it's a suggestion, that Dr. Latimore and myself, when we teach our class, our students evaluate us, right? Whether they like us or not, they evaluate us, right? And our chairs and our deans, they see this evaluation. I would like to see a process where the community evaluates our police officers, because it's one thing to hear from their supervisors, but to hear from the community on how they're doing their job, it's another. I may think I'm the best professor in the world, which I do, right? But when my students give me a negative report, I take that very personal, because that's the signal for me to change something. So I don't know, Mayor, how to put that into process, but I think there needs to be a citizen's voice in the evaluation of our police officers. I am not anti-police either. I think we need to feel safe that our police officers are there to protect us. And in the Black community, we don't feel that.
Mayor, you're hearing a Black leader of his community saying that his police force doesn't make him feel safe. And that's a very legitimate feeling. In fact, the folks that I've been talking to this past week, I'm learning a lot too, like you. And you know, the reality of a young Black man is totally different than the reality you and I will ever have. And that is they leave their house afraid, knowing that they're actively being hunted. That's what they know, right? I mean, that's abhorrent, but you've got Black men and Black women in San Antonio who feel that way. And now you're talking to a veteran of the armed forces who is a leader of an institution, saying that that's the way he feels too at his own workplace. It seems like you and I have a lot of heavy lifting to do here.
Yeah, well, I think we all do, but yes, we do. And, you know, I think that it's the same way in every level of government and business and everything else. Those who are in power build up institutions and structures around them to preserve their own authority. And so we just have to be realistic about that. We have to be clear-eyed about that. It will be present in every form. And so how do we do what the bishop is saying and create systems in which the citizens who are being served and who, who are hiring our security and our police forces have the ability to provide a very clear, transparent evaluation of that, and how do we act upon that once we got it. But there's a lot of avenues that we have to explore here, and I'm hoping that people will tune in to the 2:00 on Wednesday as we sort of lay out what the entire field that we're working with.
It's now 11:26, and this brings us to closing arguments. Kimiya, you first. We've got a lot on the table today. There's a lot to unpack, and surely an hour and a half does not do this topic justice at all. And this is a conversation that needs to be a lot longer than this. But in this short amount of time, have you learned anything from the speakers that you've listened to? And if not, if yes, what is that? And what are you hoping that our audience takes away, if they have to take away one thing from this conversation today?
I think that, being, like I said, a Black woman in America, I haven't necessarily learned anything new from this conversation. I've been further validated in what I already knew to survive. But I will say that, you made a statement that you said touching racism can be a dangerous political thing. And I think once we can get past that, I think once we can blatantly call out racist statements, we can identify xenophobia, right? The example you used of Chinese folk being accused of spread the coronavirus. Like I said, the comment that Trump made about Mexicans, the way that Black women are demonized and stereotyped. I think that once we can get there, once politics stops flinching, when we have these conversations, I think we will get further. But this is definitely a crawl, and after a crawl comes a walk, and after a walk comes a run. So I definitely do think that we are on the right path. And any closing remark I have is that hashtag Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Thank you, Kimiya. That's I'm glad you were here today. I really appreciate your honesty and your plea that all of us be more vulnerable to ideas that we didn't embrace fully before. Bishop, closing arguments. If people are to remember anything from today, what is that? And what'd you learn from today's conversation?
Like Miss Factory, I don't know if I learned anything new because I've been living with this. I'm 60 years old. I've seen this a long time and haven't seen many changes, but there've been some baby steps. But I would like to say this, that I just read an article just recently, and the article is titled George Floyd, Modern Day Emmett Till. And I thought, wow. And it's a very short article. It's written by a lady by the name of Carey Harris. Y'all Google it and read it. It's a very short article. But I think that really says that this is where we are as a nation. George Floyd is our new Emmett Till. Emmett Till awoke the nation and the civil rights movement. Let us not make his death in vain. Let us make positive change in the city of San Antonio, in the state of Texas, and in our nation. That's my closing argument.
Thank you, Bishop. That was good. Dr. Latimore, your turn.
Everybody has said it so wonderfully, and I just appreciate having the time to share with all of you. I think for me, I'm an optimist, and maybe it's not the time that people want to talk about being optimists, but I am, and I have that hope. I believe that we are weeping right now, but I do believe, in my tradition, I'm a Christian, and I believe that joy is going to come at some point, and joy is going to come in a new day. And I believe that these protests and the support is different from what I've ever seen. Emmett Till didn't have the broad-based support that George Floyd has had of millions of people across the world. Even the Pope is talking about issues with George Floyd. And so I think that this is a special time in which Martin Luther King, when he called to the ministers in Birmingham, many of the leading ministers in Birmingham sent him a letter rebuking him, saying that he was moving too fast and he didn't need to do this and that he should just lay off and stay out. I think even the moderates now understand, the center understands, the majority understands that this ain't right. I'm just gonna say it the way it is. This ain't right. And that people are hurting. And that I think now it's gone from what Du Bois said, what does it mean to feel like a problem? Du Bois talked about feeling like a problem. Now I think America is saying, I hope America is saying, let's take this burden off of Black folk a little bit so that we don't always have to feel like we're the problem and that we're the ones being asked to find the solution. It's America's problem. It's America's solution. Black people cannot hold that burden all by themselves. We've held it for too long. We got to have help in this. And I feel that we do have help. And I hope, and I do believe in redemption and reconciliation. That's just, I believe in it.
Thank you, Dr. Mayor. Closing arguments.
You know, the coronavirus pandemic has been challenging, but it's also been clarifying, because the photo of the food bag sort of became the icon of where many people were even before coronavirus started, which is that there is a level of economic desperation out there that some people are just now seeing for the first time, but far too many people have known for generations here in San Antonio and throughout the country. It was a moment to clarify. And since then, we have all been saying in uniform, we will never be the same. We're not going to return to the way things were. If we did, we're doing it all wrong. I hope that the murder of George Floyd is that moment for us from a perspective of power structures and how race plays into that in the United States. We can't go back to the way things were. There are things happening here in the United States, in cities across the United States, that are clarifying. They're very difficult, just like we've experienced through this pandemic, but they're clarifying, and they're a moment to build again from a foundation of equity and equality and racial justice if we seize on that moment. And so that's my hope. And I'll be working every day to find that place. And so I'll also say Black Lives Matter. And when they do matter within our systems of government, then we'll know we've achieved some change. But change is coming, and I look forward to working on it with you.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to end with that, but Kimiya, you've taught us a lot today. And so let me tell you what I've learned. I've learned that I don't know what I don't know. And that the amount of that which I don't know can stop a team of horses. And that listening to the young folks, the conscience of America is really opening my eyes. And so, Kimiya, can you tell us where we can learn more about the problem, the solution, where we've been, and where we're going?
You can learn from yourselves. You really have to have these honest conversations. You have to look yourself in the mirror. You have to hold yourself accountable. All of the work that I've done are conversations that I've had with myself. And so it really comes down to accountability. Like I said, being able to say, okay, I am white passing. Okay, I did cut this Black person off. I want to do better. I want to be better. And I think Black people are more willing to forgive, when those steps are taken. So simply looking within, listening to others, one of my favorite professors always said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should do more listening than we should do talking. And so that's something that I have done with the community, and it's gotten me and the Black community this far in demonstrating. So that's really all I can say. Look in the mirror, hold yourself accountable, and be willing and ready to grow. That's the only way.
Thank you, Kimiya Factory, Mayor Nirenberg, Bishop Trevor Alexander, Dr. Carey Latimore. This has been enlightening. It's been powerful. It's been a difficult conversation. I hope that a lot of folks learned. I hope that all of us got something out of this. And I hope that if I invite you for a second round conversation to talk about policing, which we'll probably do, I think Thursday, June 11th at 5 p.m., folks, I hope to bring back some or all of these speakers together again so we can talk about the next steps with a focus on policing in America, policing in San Antonio. If you want more information about what the city is trying to accomplish, not just in this one space of race relations or policing, but just in anything, please visit sanantonio.gov. Bishop Alexander, do you have a website for TrueVine?
Yes, it's www.tvmin.org.
Wonderful.
tvmin.org.
And Dr. Latimore, is there somewhere in particular where we can learn a little bit more about your work?
That's on my Trinity page. and I have a page at Trinity. So
Trinity.edu.
Yes.
Great. And Kimiya, any particular Facebook pages that you want us to follow to make sure that we understand what you're doing and when you're doing it, so we can all stand side by side with you and help?
Yes, I'm actually in the works of cooking something up, so that'll be hopefully soon ready for me to announce. But in the meantime, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Kimiya Denise. You can also visit www.changerapeculture.org to see resources for survivors of sexual assault and violence and the work that I do pertaining to Title IX and sexual assault.
Wonderful. God bless you, folks. That ends our town hall. We'll see you next week on June 11th at 5 p.m. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.